And today, I'm going to show you exactly how the top 1% manage their money. Not the fake Instagram version, not the guru nonsense. The real system that has been used by wealthy Jewish families for thousands of years and is still being used by the wealthiest people on earth today. But before we begin, let me tell you something that might upset you. If you're waiting for your big break, for that promotion, for that lottery win, for someone to hand you wealth, you're already losing. Because the 1% don't wait for money. They command it. They don't hope for wealth. They architect it. And they don't manage money the way you were taught. I know this because I've lived on both sides. I grew up in a family that struggled. My father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. We weren't poor, but we were always one emergency away from disaster. I watched my parents stress about money every single day, and I promised myself I would never live like that. Today, I'm a multimillionaire. I've helped dozens of families go from paycheck to paycheck to financial freedom, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, the difference between the 99% and the 1% isn't intelligence. It's not luck. It's not even hard work. It's a system, a framework, a set of principles that, once you understand them, make wealth almost inevitable. By the end of this video, you're going to know the exact framework I use. It's called the 40-30-20-10 rule, and if you apply it consistently for the next 12 months, your financial life will be unrecognizable. But I need to warn you, this isn't easy. This requires discipline. This requires you to go against everything society has programmed you to believe about money. And most people won't do it. They'll watch this video, nod along, and then go right back to their old habits. Don't be most people. Let's begin. The first thing you need to understand is this. The 1% don't earn money. They own money. There's a massive difference. According to research, here's how the top 1% actually make their wealth. 75% are entrepreneurs who own businesses. Apartment, I could go out on weekends. I felt successful. Then one day, I had lunch with a client. He was a real estate investor, about 60 years old. We were talking, and he asked me, "David, how much do you make when you're sleeping?" I didn't understand the question. I said, "What do you mean? I don't make anything when I'm sleeping. I'm sleeping." He smiled and said, "Exactly. That's your problem. I make about $15,000 a month while I sleep. My properties generate rent. My investments pay dividends. My businesses run without me. If I stopped working today, my income wouldn't stop. Can you say the same?" I couldn't. And that conversation changed my life because I realized I didn't own anything. I was just a highly paid slave. That's when I started studying how the wealthy actually manage money. And what I discovered is that they follow a very specific framework. Not the budget nonsense you learned in school. A real system that builds wealth. This is the 40-30-20-10 rule. Let me break it down. The first 40% of your income goes to ownership. This is the most important category, and it's the one most people completely ignore. In the Torah, there's a principle called Ma'aser Rishon, the first tithe. Before you do anything else with your harvest, you give the first portion to God. Why? Because it establishes priority. It says, "This comes first, before my needs, before my wants, before anything else." The same principle applies to wealth building. The first 40% of your income must go to buying ownership. Not after you pay your bills, not after you buy what you want. First. What do I mean by ownership? Anything that works for you when you're not working. Anything that generates income without requiring your time. There are 4 main categories. Category 1, businesses. If you can start or buy a business, even a small one, you're buying a passive income. Category 4, skills that scale. This is the most overlooked form of ownership, but it's the most powerful. If you can learn a skill that can be packaged and sold without your direct involvement, you own something incredibly valuable. For example, I learned how to teach financial literacy. I created an online course. I recorded it once, and now it sells every single day without me doing anything. That's ownership. Here's how you implement this. Every time you get paid, before you do anything else, 40% goes into one of these 4 categories. If you make $5,000 a month, $2,000 goes to ownership. No excuses, no exceptions. I know what you're thinking. Rabbi, I can't afford to put 40% away. I have bills. I understand. So let me tell you what I did when I was broke. I started with 10%. That's it, just 10% to ownership. And I lived on the other 90%. It was uncomfortable. I had to cut expenses. I stopped eating out. I canceled subscriptions. I drove an old car. But within 2 years, that 10% had grown into investments that were generating $500 a month in passive income. Then I increased to 20%, then 30%, then 40%. And today, my passive income is more than most people's salaries. Not because I'm special, because I followed the system. The second 30% of your income goes to lifestyle. This is what you live on. Your rent, your food, your transportation, your basic needs. Now here's where most people get it backwards. They spend 80 or 90% on lifestyle and try to invest whatever's left over. That's why they stay broke. The 1% do the opposite. They keep their lifestyle costs as low as possible for as long as possible. Not because they're cheap, because they understand delayed gratification. In the Talmud, there's a story about 2 students. One spends all his money on fine clothes and good food, thinking he deserves to enjoy life. The other lives simply, saves his money, and invests it. 10 years later, the first student is still working for someone else. The second student owns the business. The lesson? Your lifestyle should be the last thing you upgrade, not the first. I see this first rental property. That property now generates $1,500 a month in passive income. If I had bought a BMW instead, I'd have a depreciating asset and a car payment. Instead, I have an income stream that will last decades. The Torah teaches, "Who is rich? He who is satisfied with his portion." Satisfaction isn't about having less. It's about not needing more to be happy. So here's your rule. 30% for lifestyle. That's it. If you're making $5,000 a month, you live on $1,500. If you're making $10,000, you live on $3,000. And you don't increase it until your passive income is covering your lifestyle entirely. The third 20% of your income goes to protection. This is your safety net, your emergency fund, your insurance, your peace of mind. Most people skip this step. They think, I'll start investing first, and then I'll build an emergency fund. Big mistake, because the moment an emergency hits, and it will, you're forced to sell your investments at the worst possible time. I learned this the hard way. When I was 28, I had just started investing. I had about $10,000 in the stock market. Then my car broke down. The repair was $3,000. I didn't have an emergency fund, so I had to sell my stocks to pay for it. The problem? The market was down that week. I sold at a loss. If I had just waited 3 months, those stocks would have recovered and I'd have made money. But I didn't have a choice. I needed the car to get to work. That $3,000 car repair cost me about $8,000 in lost investment growth over the next 5 years, all because I didn't have a protection fund. Here's how you build it. Take 20% of your income and put it into a high-yield savings account. Not invested, not in stocks, cash, liquid, accessible. Your goal is to have 6 months of lifestyle expenses saved. If you live on $3,000 a month, you need $18,000 in your protection fund. Belief changes everything. I started giving 10% when I had almost nothing. People thought I was crazy. How can you give away money when you're broke? They asked. But I understood something they didn't. Giving isn't about the money. It's about the identity. When you give, you become a giver, and givers attract more than takers ever will. Here's what happened. The more I gave, the more opportunities came my way. Not because God was magically rewarding me, but because my mindset shifted. I stopped thinking like a victim and started thinking like a creator. The Talmud says, Aser bishvil shetitasher. Give tithes so that you may become wealthy. This isn't superstition, it's psychology, it's spiritual law. But here's the key. You have to give first, not last. Not, I'll give when I have extra. You give from the first fruits before you pay yourself, before you do anything else. That 10% can go to your religious community, to charity, to causes you believe in, to people in need. The destination matters less than the act. Because when you give consistently, you train your mind to believe in abundance, and that belief creates abundance. Now, let me show you how this all works together with a real example. Let's say you make $5,000 a month. Here's how you'd apply the 40-30-20-10 rule. 40% to ownership, $2,000. This goes into index funds, a business, real estate, or skill development. 30% to lifestyle, $1,500. This covers your rent, food, transportation, and basic needs. 20% to protection, $1,000. This builds your emergency fund until you have 6 months saved. 10% to generosity, $500. This goes to charity, your community, or people in need. Total, $5,000. Every dollar has a job. Now I know what you're thinking. Rabbi, I can't live on $1,500 a month. Maybe you can't right now, so here's what you do. You increase your income. Get a side hustle. Learn a high-income skill. Loves it, not because she has to. That's the power of the system. Now, let me address the biggest objection I hear. This sounds great, Rabbi, but I have debt. How can I invest when I owe money? Here's the answer. You do both. But you prioritize high-interest debt first. If you have credit card debt at 18% interest, paying that off is a guaranteed 18% return. That's better than any investment. So, in that case, your 40% ownership allocation should go toward debt elimination until the high-interest debt is gone. But here's the key. You still give 10%. You still build your protection fund. And you still keep your lifestyle at 30%. You just redirect the ownership portion to debt payoff temporarily. Once the debt is gone, you redirect that money to investments. And you never go back into debt again. The Torah is very clear about debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The borrower is slave to the lender." Debt is slavery, and you can't build wealth in chains. Let me give you the final piece of the puzzle. The 40-30-20-10 rule is the framework. But there's one more principle that makes it all work: consistency. The 1% don't get rich from one big win. They get rich from small, consistent actions repeated over decades. In the Talmud, there's a teaching: a little bit consistently is better than a lot sporadically. You don't need to invest $10,000 once. You need to invest $500 every single month for 20 years. That's how wealth is built. Not in explosions, in compound interest. If you invest $2,000 a month at an average 8% return, in 20 years you'll have over $1.1 million. In 30 years, over $2.8 million. In 40 years, over $6.5 million. That's not luck. That's math. That's the system. But it only works if you start. And it
Subscribe my YouTube channel, Blessed Billionaire.